what would seem to you the future. This is the year 1944, and Rastin and I have jerked you out of your own time across 5 solid centuries," said the other, grinning. I looked from one to the other. "Messieurs," I pleaded, and Rastin shook his head. "He does not believe," he said to the other. Then to me: "Where were you just before you found yourself here, Henri?" he asked. "In a field at the outskirts of Paris," I said. "Well, look from that window and see if you still believe yourself in your 15th century Paris." I went to the window and looked out. Mother of God, what a sight before my eyes! The familiar gray little houses, the open fields behind them, the saunterers in the dirt streets, all these were gone. It was a new and terrible city that lay about me. Its broad streets were of stone, and great buildings of many levels rose on either side of them. Great numbers of people, dressed like the two beside me, moved in the streets, and also strange vehicles or carriages, undrawn by horse or ox, that rushed to and fro, and undreamed of speed. I staggered back to the chair. "You believe now, Henri?" asked the white-bearded Rastin, kindly enough, and I nodded meekly. My brain was whirling. He pointed to the circle of metal on the floor and the machines around the room. "Those are what we used to jerk you from your own time to this one," he said. "But how, sirs?" I asked. "For the love of God, how is it that you can take me from one time to another? Have ye become gods or devils?" "Neither one nor the other, Henri," he answered. "We are simply scientists, physicists, men who want to know as much as man can know, and who spend our lives in seeking knowledge." I felt my confidence returning. These were men such as I had dreamed might some day be. "But what can you do with time?" I asked. "Is not time a thing unalterable, unchanging?" Both shook their heads. "No, Henri, it is not. But lately have our men of science found that out." They went on to tell me things that I could not understand. It seemed they were telling me that their men of knowledge had found time to be a mere measurement or dimension, just as length or breadth or thickness. They mentioned names with reverence that I had never heard: Einstein, De Sitter, and Lorentz. I was in a maze at their words. They said that just as men use force to move or rotate matter from one point along the 3 known measurements to another, so might matter be rotated from one point in time, the 4th measurement, to another, if the right force were used. They said that their machines produced that force, and applied it to the metal circle from 500 years before to this time of theirs. They had tried it many times, they said, but nothing had been on the spot at that time, and they had rotated nothing but the air above it from the one time to the other, and the reverse. I told them of the thunderclaps that had been heard at the spot in the field, and that had made me curious. They said that they had been caused by the changing of the air above the spot from one time to the other in their trials. I could not understand these things. They said then that I had happened to be on the spot when they had again turned on their force, and so had been rotated out of my own time into theirs. They said that they had always hoped to get someone living from a distant time in that way, since such a man would be a proof to all other men of knowledge of what they had been able to do. I could not comprehend, and they saw and told me not to fear. I was not fearful, but excited at the things that I saw around me. I asked of those things, and Rastin and Thicourt laughed and explained some of them to me as best they could. Much they said that I did not understand, but my eyes saw marvels in that room of which I had never dreamed. They showed me a thing like a small glass bottle with wires inside, and then told me to touch a button beneath it. I did so, and the bottle shone with a brilliant light exceeding that of scores of candles. I shrank back, but they laughed, and when Rastin touched the button again, the light in the glass thing vanished. I saw that there were many of these things in the ceiling. They showed me also a rounded black object of metal with a wheel at the end. A belt ran around the wheel and around smaller wheels connected to many machines. They touched a lever on this object, and a sound of humming came from it, and the wheel turned very fast, turning all the machines with the belt. It turned faster than any man could ever have turned it, yet when they touched the lever again, its turning ceased. They said that it was the power of the lightning in the skies that they used to make the light and to turn that wheel. My brain reeled at the wonders that they showed. One took an instrument from the table that he held to his face, saying that he would summon the other scientists or men of knowledge to see their experiment that night. He spoke into the instrument as though to different men, and let me hear voices from it answering him. They said that the men who answered were leagues separated from him. I could not believe, and yet somehow I did believe. I was half dazed with wonder, and yet excited too. The white bearded man, Rastin, saw that and encouraged me. Then they brought a small box with an opening, and placed a black disk on the box, and set it turning in some way. A woman's voice came from the opening of the box, singing. I shuddered when they told me that the woman was one who had died years before. Could the dead speak thus? How can I describe what I saw there? Another box or cabinet there was, with an opening also. I thought it was like that from which I had heard the dead woman singing, but they said it was different. They touched buttons on it, and a voice came from it speaking in a tongue I knew not. They said that the man was speaking thousands of leagues from us, in a strange land across the uncrossed Western Ocean, yet he seemed speaking by my side. They saw how dazed I was by these things, and gave me wine. At that I took heart, for wine, at least, was as it had always been. "You will want to see Paris, the Paris of our time, Henri?" asked Rastin. "But it is different and terrible," I said. "We'll take you," Thicourt said, "but first your clothes." He got a long light coat that they had me put on, that covered my tunic and hose, and a hat of grotesque round shape that they put on my head. They led me then out of the building and onto the street. I gazed astoundingly along the street. It had a raised walk at either side, on which many hundreds of people moved to and fro, all dressed in as strange a fashion. Many, like Rastin and Thicourt, seemed of gentle blood, yet in spite of this they did not wear a sword or even a dagger. There were no knights or squires or priests or peasants. All seemed dressed much the same. Small lads ran to and fro selling what seemed sheets of very thin white parchment, many times folded and covered with lettering. Rastin said that these had written in them all the things that had happened through all the world even but hours before. I said that to write even one of these sheets would take a clerk many days, but they said that the writing was done in some way very quickly by machines. In the broad stone street between the two raised walks were rushing back and forth the strange vehicles I had seen from the window. There was no animal pulling or pushing any one of them, yet they never halted their swift rush, and carried many people at unthinkable speed. Sometimes those who walked stepped before the rushing vehicles, and then from them came terrible warning snarls or moans that made the walkers draw back. One of the vehicles stood at the walk's edge before us, and we entered it and sat side by side on a soft leather seat. Thicourt sat behind a wheel on a post with levers beside him. He touched these, and a humming sound came from somewhere in the vehicle, and then it too began to rush forward. Faster and faster along the street it went, yet neither of them seemed afraid. Many thousands of these vehicles were moving swiftly through the streets about us. We passed on, between great buildings and along wider streets, my eyes and ears numbed by what I saw about me. Then the buildings grew smaller after we had gone for miles through them, and we were passing through the city's outskirts. I could not believe hardly that it was Paris in which I was. We came to a great flat and open field outside the city, and there Thicourt stopped, and we got out of the vehicle. There were big buildings at the field's end, and I saw other vehicles rolling out of them across the field, ones different from any I had yet seen, with flat, wing-like projections on either side. They rolled out over the field very fast, and then I cried out as I saw them rising from the ground into the air. Mother of God, they were flying! The men in them were flying! Rastin and Thicourt took me forward to the great buildings. They spoke to men there, and one brought forward one of the winged cars. Rastin told me to get in, and though I was terribly afraid, there was too terrible a fascination that drew me in. Thicourt and Rastin entered after me, and we sat in seats with the other man. He had before him levers and buttons, while at the car's front was a great thing like a double oar or paddle. A loud roaring came, and that double blade began to whirl so swiftly that I could not see it. Then the car rolled swiftly forward, bumping on the ground, and then ceased to bump. I looked down, then shuddered. The ground was already far beneath. I, too, was flying in the air. We swept upward at terrible speed that increased steadily. The thunder of the car was terrific, and as the man at the levers changed their position, we curved around and over, downward and upward, as though birds. Rastin tried to explain to me how the car flew, but it was all too wonderful, and I could not understand. I only knew that a wild